Good evening, New Salem. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. We will get started shortly. We just want to give you guys some time to come in. Good evening. We'll get started shortly. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday again. Thank you for joining us for our live. This evening, I would like to introduce you all to Minister Charity Clancy, who will be talking to us this evening about coping mechanisms as well as ways to grieve during COVID-19. We're so excited to have you all here. I think this will be very good for all of us. I know a lot of us have been suffering from losses. So without further ado, I will be turning it over to Minister Clancy. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them inside of the chat in the comments, and I will read them at the very end of our broadcast. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening again. My name is Charity Clancy, or Minister Charity Clancy. I've been a member of New Salem since 1999. That sounds about right. So I've been with the church for a while. And just to give you like a brief background on how I came to be, I guess you can say someone who speaks on grief, because this is not a topic that we technically like to discuss or deal with. But about 20 years ago on Father's Day, my grandparents were going to church, and unfortunately they were struck from a car driven by some teenagers. And my grandfather, unfortunately, his life was taken from him instantly. So this coming June, it will be 20 years since we lost our grandfather. And that is my paternal grandfather. So about 9 months later, my maternal grandfather was actually in the hospital, and he ended up being moved to the nursing home for about a year. And then on February 9th of 2001, he passed away. So we had two back-to-back, members of my family, the patriarchs, and they both passed away. And as the oldest granddaughter, that was very hard for me. But, as society would have it, I kept pushing through, didn't think anything about it. But then as we went into 2003, my grandmother had actually had a slip and fall, and she had to actually be moved into a nursing home as well. And this is my maternal grandmother. And so after being there for about a year as well, on her 90th birthday, which is April 13th, she passed away on us. So that was really difficult for me as well as my brother, because we always had our grandparents there for at least 20 something years. But I do remember sitting in the limousine at that time after the funeral with my brother, and we had our heads just laid on each other. And basically I looked, just leaned over to him and I said, I pray to God we don't have to go through this again. I said, this is too much. And he was like, yeah, I know. And so it was one of those things, because I only have one sibling, which was my brother, and we just held to each other very tightly, after those coming months. Needless to say, May was good. In June, he turned 25. So we were really happy. He ended up graduating from Wright State. He got his bachelor's degree. So things were on the up and up. We took a family trip. It was just a fantastic thing. Well, unfortunately, come June, I got a call at on midnight of June 25th, and my mom stated that your brother's been in a bad car accident. You need to get home. Well, at that time, I had plans to go see one of our friends who lives in Michigan. But when I got the phone call, I had my bag already packed from the night before. So I took the bag and jumped in the car and drove to Dayton, Ohio, which is where my family is at. And so on the drive, I'm praying, 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 God, just take care of my brother, just make sure he's okay. I got to the hospital. Um, I forgot which time it was, but basically the doctor hadn't come out. My dad said he's still back in surgery. And at this point, I looked around the room and my entire family, and I mean my entire family, meaning extended family, we were all in the waiting room. And so probably about five something, the doctor comes out and he's just telling us the process of what happened. And unfortunately, after several resuscitations, my brother didn't make it. And so I just remember looking around the room. My dad was in disbelief. We were all in disbelief because if you had to know my brother, he was total life of the party, just a fun person to be around. So it was just devastating. I just remember my heart just falling, and it was a while before I even felt anything compared to normal after his death. Just I went through a whole new process I had never experienced before. So that was in June 25th of 2003. I did come back to church probably in September. And I remember some people just coming up to me, comforting me. And I just was like, I'm fine, just keep going, keep going. Well, unfortunately, probably after a couple more months of stating I was fine, I had a really, really good friend who just took me aside and she said, "You're not fine. I would like you to come to our grief class that I'm teaching here at the church." And I said, "Well, I'll think about it." And so basically, right around early October, November, I ended up attending the class. So thank God to that class because it got me on the path of trying to heal myself and to get myself in a better place of dealing with my brother's death. Now, I'm not stating that it all happened in 2, 3 months because I can tell you the first year after he passed, it was a complete blur. But I can say that it is now almost been, 17 years. And things are better, so much better. But what I wanted to discuss after just introducing myself, just to let you know what I've gone through, today's topic is truly about strategies for coping with grief. Now, in order to just give you strategies, I wanted to give you like few, some definitions on what grief looks like. And a, grief is defined as an intense emotional suffering caused by loss, disaster, or misfortune. It is an acute sorrow or deep sadness. Let's also remember that grief is just not tied to the loss of a person. It can be loss of several things. Grief is also not comfortable at all, but it is necessary. And grief is meant to be a transition, not a lifestyle. That means that you do not stay in that place. You continue to keep moving forward. And what it's supposed to do at the end is basically prepare you to live your life after the loss of losing someone close to you. Some types of grief that I just mentioned are losing a loved one, losing your job. And when you lose your job, you lose your income, you lose your status, change in a relationship, such as a separation, a divorce, even a broken friendship, and loss of health due to a chronic disease, illness, or traumatic situation. The first thing that kind of pops to mind when I think of illness is cancer, because cancer is such a strong disease and it affects so much of your body that it does become a traumatic thing that occurs in someone's life. Also, relocating. For some people, relocating can be very difficult. I do remember when I got my first job right out of college, I didn't know it at the time, but I was grieving having my family with me. It was very difficult at first, and then even finding a church home. I mean, it was one of those things where things had become natural, a part of my life, and now I didn't have it and having to start over, that was kind of difficult. But I got through the process. Unfortunately, I did come back to Columbus, Ohio. So here I am. And don't laugh at this one, but some people grieve the loss of their pet. Now, I don't have any pets, but I am close to a very close family and their dog. But some people, their pet is like their child, and they love that pet more than anything. So people grieve the loss of their pet. And I had added to my list after the last 2 months, COVID-19. This has caused a different type of grief that's still being formulated. But I will say that since we've been quarantined, no interactions with large congregations, gatherings, that is creating a form of grief for some people, especially when they're used to that. Just think, we haven't been able to fellowship with other church members. We haven't been able to fellowship with our families in the way that we normally do. And unfortunately, we have lost people due to COVID-19. And those individuals can't have a normal funeral service for their loved one. So, yes, we are facing different types of grief when it comes to COVID-19. One thing I will say also, we have those who have been furloughed during this period. They're experiencing some form of grief because now they don't have an income to take care of their household. So COVID-19 is a whole new animal. And again, like I stated, it's still new things we're finding out each and every day about um, this this disease. I want to state, and how we're moving forward and how do we handle it. Some things I have learned that have become what we call myths about grief, meaning things that shouldn't be said or things that people think are natural to say when you've lost someone. So a few of the myths that have been stated, and they kind of make me laugh through life, have been time heals all wounds. While that sounds true, I have come to believe that God heals all wounds in his time. So it doesn't look the same on everybody, but remember, God heals all wounds in his time. Another one is replace the loss. Some of the people I've spoken with over the last several years have stated to me, if they've lost a child, they've had people tell them, you're young enough, you can have another child. Now, that's not something that we really want to say to someone. And pray for those who say things to you that may rub you the wrong way, because unfortunately they just may not know. And we're still learning, like I stated, about grief. So, forgive them forgive them for what they know not. But basically replace the loss. If you lost a pet, all you have to do is go out and buy another pet. Those are easy things to say, but at the time when someone has lost something, it's not the appropriate thing to say. Isolation is the best way to handle my grief. I need to grieve alone. Well, I actually said that myself, and I can tell you from experience, it does not work. We are not meant to be alone. We were never designed to be alone. So we shouldn't grieve alone. So if someone is stating, well, maybe you need to just go be by yourself, that may be true at periods of time, maybe of times of rest when you just aren't getting any rest because your mind is just constantly racing, racing, racing. But to go through this entire, process by yourself, not a good thing to do. Bury my feelings. Um, Burying your feelings is also not a good thing to do. I think it is absolutely best that we deal with our feelings. If you don't deal with your feelings, all it does is create an onion in your stomach, and you start feeling all these other effects going on in your body. And what do we know about an onion? It's a layer. So basically, you start creating layers of pain when you bury your feelings. So that's not a good one either. Be strong for others. Now, I know we've all heard that one before. Be strong for other people when you all have experienced losing something. That's not always true. And being strong for someone else does not give you the opportunity to be strong or to get yourself through a healthy process of grief. So I know that I have someone close to me lose their mom recently, and she had stated to me, "Well, I have to be strong, for such and such." And I said, "I totally understand that, but also remember, you have to be there for yourself, and you need to take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, then you're no good to the other people that you're trying to help. So remember, you don't have to be strong for other people." Another one is, don't feel bad. That's not true. You are allowed to feel bad when you lose someone close to you, or loss of any situation, loss of a job. People may say, "Oh, there's another job out there. Oh, so you broke up with such and such. Oh, you can get another relationship." You are allowed to feel bad, but just remember, again, these people are just trying to encourage you. So don't hold it against them. Don't charge it to their hearts. Just charge it to their heads that they're just saying don't feel bad. I know another thing that has been said, that I've discussed with my class is, some have been even told, God needed another angel. So, not to feel bad about losing your loved one, or they're in a better place. Now, while those are very nice Christian phrases to use, and I won't say, but be mindful. Yes, God, we want the angels, and they're in a better place. We all agree with that. But at that moment in time, when you are feeling what you are feeling, that's not something you really want to hear. And I do remember someone telling me that when I lost my brother, and I said, "I want him here with me." And I was being very honest. So I know it sounded selfish, but that's how I felt at that moment in 2003. So sometimes you just got to allow yourself to feel the pain, experience it, and not feel bad for how you're feeling that specific day. I know sometimes when I was feeling like I wasn't so sociable, I would stay home until I became sociable. And I always had someone calling to check on me to make sure that I was still alive and breathing. But those are the myths about grief. In our class that I've been teaching through our Sunday school program, we are actually reading, or going through the book on death and dying by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross. And she is one of like some of the first pioneers to talk about grief and stages of grief. And through my studies, I've seen different types of books set up for this. Some people say it's 5 stages, some say it's no stages, it's just what you go through. And then I've seen 7 stages. But in this book, we just kind of highlighted the 5 steps, which we are still going through. But the first one being denial and isolation. Denial meaning that you have basically denied that you have lost this person. And the question becomes, no, they're not gone. They're still here. I'm in total denial about the whole thing happening. Then the next one is isolation. Isolation means basically, I'm going to isolate myself now because this person is no longer in my life. And as I stated on the previous page, we are not meant to be alone. Genesis 2:18 says God made a woman for man so that he would not be alone. We are not meant to be alone, man or woman. We are meant to be in fellowship with other people. So when we come to denial and isolation, we have to acknowledge it and find ways to basically accept what has happened to us, and then also accept people being in our lives to walk us through this process. The next step, or the next stage of the grief process, is anger. Well, anger is a very volatile one to deal with. It is it's interesting to say the least. I can honestly say and tell this, and I probably am just now truly being honest with myself, how angry I was at God when He took my brother. And I know that doesn't sound very Christian thing to say, but I was angry. But I realized a lot of my anger kept coming back to me. What I probably didn't do for my brother, what I didn't say to him, or the fact that now you've left me and I no longer have my best friend. I no longer have someone to help me when our parents get older. You left me, because my brother and I are the two oldest grandkids, and there's a significant gap between me and my other cousins. So it was always just me and my brother. So I never thought of living my life without him. When I thought of growing old, I always saw him next to me. So I was angry when God took that, I guess you can say, that fantasy that I had away from me. Now, I will say this: God is big enough to handle our anger. So, no, you can be angry, but I'll also say don't stay there. Um, Meaning, don't let the anger fester too long. Allow the anger to reside and move on through your life. You can be angry. We all have phases where we're angry. We always, in the Bible, it tells us don't sin when we're angry. Basically, just move through that process. I'm not stating this overnight process, but I am stating that you can move through anger and not and be okay after it. The fourth one is bargaining. Bargaining is kind of a hard one to talk about. Um, and this is probably the easiest way I can explain bargaining. Bargaining is like, let's say you have your child, and your child comes to you and asks you, well, can I go to such and such's party this coming weekend? But you've watched this child probably all week do everything they're not supposed to do. They're not cleaning their room. They're not doing any of their chores. They're not doing what they need to do in school. They're, just on Facebook, social media, and they're just not spending any time with their family. They're doing everything that they should not be doing. And so when they come and ask you, you say no, and you give them the reason why you said no. And so then they think of a strategy, which we call bargaining, to get back into good graces with their parents so that they can get to that party on Friday. Sometimes when I've seen this, even with our own lives, when we have, let's say, someone who has a terminal illness, we may have prayed and asked God, God, if you save such and such, or if you heal such and such, then I'll do this. Well, the issue with a bargain is either it's going to be fulfilled or it's going to be broken. So the question is, what happens? What is your reaction when the bargain is not met? The next step or next stage is depression. Depression is one of those very hard topics to talk about, and sometimes um, we try to diagnose people, even though we're not clinical professionals to do that. So let's not do that. But depression can be seen when you're going through the grief process, and it is normal to feel some form of depression. I know that when I came back to Columbus, I live here, and all of my family's in Dayton. I felt some type of depression being away from them, because at that point in my life, I wanted to be near my family like all the time. But I had to realize, and what God showed me was He showed me a different kind of family that's not biological, but a spiritual family. And then all of the love I received from my friends. Oh my gosh, I have a great network of friends. But He had to show me that I can get through that. And so sometimes when we get in that mode of depression, we think that we're, again, back to being alone. And then we also are just depressed when we start thinking about what it's like not having that person in our lives. And then for some, if that person was the solid rock of the family, now it's like, what is our family going to look like? Is our family going to fall apart? Or they financially took care of the household, and then you start thinking, oh, how are these bills going to get paid? I've never paid these bills. So a whole bunch of emotions go through you when you go through the grief process, and depression again can be one of them. Now, what I will say is, if the depression becomes prolonged, as you, the friend, as you, the family member, as you, someone who cares about this person that's going through this process, just keep a close eye on this person, because it can turn into something more. And you just need to watch the signs, and then be there to offer the assistance or get them the assistance they will need to come out of the the depressive state. The last stage in Ross's book is acceptance. When we get to the point of acceptance, That means we're acknowledging that we've lost someone, and we're also acknowledging that we no longer want to postpone the pain we've been going through. We we basically state, I've lost this person. I'm not going to minimize their loss, but I am going to try and move forward with living my life a different way. So acceptance again is pretty much, like I said, the upward out of the, I guess you can say, denial, isolation, anger, and bargaining and depression are kind of going down. But then when you get to acceptance, you feel like that's the curve to coming back up out of the stages. And just so we're reminded, and I probably didn't say this earlier, you don't follow these 5 steps in this specific order, you will feel any stage at any point in your life. I know with my own experience, I felt denial immediately, when the doctor came out, gave us the diagnosis. Isolation was in spurts. Depression was in spurts too. Um, Anger lasted probably a long time. I felt like I was angry that entire first year after he passed away. But again, you go through different phases of these stages. Again, not in order, but in and out, in and out. And don't feel bad if you're going back and forth in any of these stages, because that's normal. Sometimes I'm a very strong type A plus B equals C. So assuming I'm going to go specifically in these 5 stages, whereas I learned that it doesn't go in that way. It's not linear, it's just a wave of motions. I've talked about grief, the definition, what it looks like, the types of losses, 5 stages. Now, I want to really get to the meat of it, where you may have some of your questions, is strategies on coping with grief. One of the first things I really want everyone to know is allow yourself to grieve as you will. Do not compare yourself to someone else. For instance, I lost my brother. My parents lost their son. Our grieving process was not similar in any way, fashion. The only comparison was we lost the same person. But the relationship, I had a sibling relationship, whereas my parents had a son, mother, father relationship. So their process was totally different from mine. And I did not compare myself to what there should be, because I know that there are times even now that they are, still thinking, what would his life have been? And even I do that, but my process is a lot different from theirs. And even with that, I have met people who have lost their siblings. My process was different from that person who lost their sibling, because it's a different relationship, it's a different dynamic. And just like our experiences our testimonies are based off of our own experiences, so is everything that goes on in our life. Our grieving is basically designed specifically for you, specifically, individually. Your grieving process will not look like anybody else's. It will not be on the same timeline as anyone else. So just remember that. Crying is a good tool to use during this process. Now, a lot of us don't like to cry in public. And if you were raised like I was, don't cry unless I give you something to cry for, was what I heard. And that's a joke. But I am basically stating crying is good. Crying is a cleansing mechanism. I found, while it was very hard to cry in public, because I can specifically remember one time I went back to work too early. I'm at my desk and ready to bust out in tears. And thank God my desk was close to the bathroom. I had enough time to just dive into the bathroom and let everything out. But I also had a supervisor who came and said, it's time for you to go home because you tried to come back to work too soon. So I allowed myself to cry, cry, cry. And I'll tell you, after that crying went on and on, every time I cried, and I mean, I really cried, I was so drained afterwards that I was finally able to get the rest that I wasn't getting normally. So just remember that crying is normal. It is our cleansing agent that God uses on us. It's okay to cry, people. The next one is begin to acknowledge and understand the significance of the loss. So with me again, I acknowledged that I had lost my brother. And then my next steps were understanding how I was going to live my life without him. And while at first it seemed very scary and I didn't want to do it, I just wanted to stay balled up. I realized had I not acknowledged and tried to move forward, I would have missed out on so many more blessings that have come my way over the last 16 and a half years. So again, acknowledge and understand the significance of the loss and then apply it to your life. I realized with my brother, he was a fearless person. He was so much fun. He was entertaining. And what it left for me, how I moved forward was enjoy your life, enjoy every day that God gives you. And, spend time with your family, enjoy being with your family, which is something he loved to do, and family and friends. So I just learned, hey, appreciate my family and friends and, do everything I can to just continue to remember he's here in my spirit. But, we still have so many of our loved ones that are here that we can spread the love to as well. The next one is seek the assistance of those willing to listen. I will state that I have some bossy friends. Um, I remember just really wanting to be by myself. And my friends basically, and make sure, had a key to my home because you do that. And they brought me food. They just showed up. So I had people always around me to comfort me, to be there for me, to love on me. I had a church family. I found new church family members after going through this process. Um, and then there's also the professional help. Now, sometimes I know that can sound like a taboo sometimes, especially in our community, but if seeking professional help is what is needed, don't be ashamed to seek it. And if people want you to feel bad for seeking professional help, that is a conversation between you and God. So definitely use the opportunity to use the resources that He places in front of you to get you through this process. The last one is understand that recovery does not mean going back to the way you were before the loss. I can honestly tell you, I am not the person I was before. At 28, 29, when I lost my brother, I was still, I'll say, still kind of fragile, still new to a lot of things. Not as, I mean, I was always outgoing, but always timid. And I will state that losing my brother was the most devastating thing that has happened to me to this date. But I can say looking at his life as an example, he was fearless, he was fun, he was the life of the party. It pushed me to see the things that were inside of me, pushed me to do things that were outside of my comfort zone. It caused me to get closer to God. It pushed me to seeking that closer relationship through going to seminary, which I thought was so beneficial for me. And look at me now, I'm even an associate minister at the church, which I always thought that that would be my brother to do that. I remember even having a conversation with him about it. And to see that it's me is just amazing that God can still use you in spite of. Also, this has also prompted me to be a strong teacher, to share my experiences with other people, to not be afraid to stand up and talk in front of people like I'm doing right now, even though I can't see anyone. But this is a very frightening experience, but this is pushing me out of my comfort zone to do what needs to be done. I do remember Pastor saying that, God uses your pain as your testimony. And I'm thinking, I never nominated myself for this type of pain, but I will state on the other side of this, it has been put to a good use. And when I know someone who has lost someone, I always just give them more of my attention to see how they're doing, checking in with them. It's just like second nature for me now to do that. So I will say that the good has come out of this process of healing in the right way and allowing God to use my grief to help others. as I get to the last page, I thought of some support scriptures, because some people say, well, do Christians grieve? Yes, we do. Um, in Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, mourn with those who mourn. Then we have John 9:11. Jesus mourned when he lost um, Lazarus. So even if our teacher, our big brother mourned, we can mourn too. And then one of my favorites is in Romans 8, verses 18 through 27. Verses 26 and 27, it basically states that the Spirit intercedes on your behalf when you can't find words to speak. The Spirit speaks for you on your behalf. That's powerful. The Spirit goes on your behalf to pray for you. That's awesome. And then there's 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, because we have hope. We have hope. At the end of the day, that's the last thing I want to leave with everybody. We have to have hope. We have to have hope. And then another scripture and last scripture is 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18, talking about those we have lost, have gone on before us, and we will be with them once again. But don't be discouraged. You will see them again. And that is all that I have for everyone today. And I thank you for listening in, and I am ready to take questions.
Thank you, Minister Clancy. So the first question we have is regarding depression for those youth members who are basically in isolation currently due to school not being in, and also missing out on things like graduation, proms, and things of that nature. What advice do you give to those individuals in their grieving process?
That's a very hard one to really explain, because while I was able to experience that, it feels like such a hard thing to acknowledge, especially when you incorporate that into your senior year. This is your whole senior experience, so these are things that you want to do. The only thing I can think of is to continue to pray through this process, and that knowing that unfortunately this is something that has happened in our generation, which is really unusual, but there will be brighter days to come ahead. The senior year is a significant year, and I will never discount that, but look forward to some other big things that are going to occur in your life as well. Again, I'm not discrediting it, but just wanting you not to stay focused on the one situation, but to look at the big picture sometimes.
What advice do you have for individuals who are struggling to find ways to remember the loss of their loved ones? So if they're having trouble looking at pictures of those individuals or visiting grave sites, what steps did you take to be able to do those things again?
I went to the grave site probably once after he passed away, and probably over the last several years, maybe 3 or 4 times. Again, that's because his burial spot is in Dayton. I will state that one thing that helped me through the process was I started journaling. I started writing things out. I started just writing to God how I was specifically feeling about that situation. One experience for me and me alone is I dreamed a lot about my brother that first year. Some of the dreams were me trying to save him, and some were at peace. And so for that first year, when I woke up, it was very hard to wake up, because I remember waking up crying because the dream wasn't real. So I just journaled a lot. I have journals all over my house of what I felt during that time. And then I know I stuck close to my parents, real close to them at that time, and talked to them. And I can honestly tell you, we ended up always finding a funny story. My brother was a class clown, and we always just found funny moments to just think about my brother. For example, he loves Martin. So for me, I watched Martin. I watched Martin like for an entire year, and now I stopped, and now I'm back watching it. Bad Boys. I just found things that he liked and that reminded me of him to get that laughter out of me.
Do you do the same thing for holidays and birthdays? A lot of folks are saying that holidays and birthdays are
Uh,
hard for. How do you stay upbeat when those come around?
I'll tell you, holidays are still difficult for me. Thanksgiving is my favorite by far because my grandmother is a great cook and so are all the people in my family. But as far as my brother, I know for a couple of times I could just imagine him sitting next to me. But holidays are one of those times where sometimes I don't know if it gets easier, but I learned we have little people in our family now, 8, 9, and 2 and 5. So those little people keep me focused and keep me looking at this is how my brother was at that age. It just keeps the good memories going forward. And we always try to do family time when we're home, like play games. As far as like at Christmas, we do a Christmas exchange game. We just try to get together and talk about everyone and talk about them in a positive way. And that also kind of brings me back to one of the other things that basically, when you think about your loved one you lost, don't always think about the bad, don't always think about the good. It has to be a happy medium. So if you're in a bad spot, you probably want to have a good memory of that person.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Uh, right now, that was the last question that we have coming through the chat. We have a lot of thank yous coming through. They're really appreciative of you sharing and giving coping mechanisms, as am I. If that was the last question, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much, Minister Clancy, for coming and sharing with us today on Wellness Wednesday. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.